Welcome back to the second part of this JavaScript Basics course. If you haven't seen the first part, you may want to check that out. The links are in the description. So if you're ready, grab yourself a cup of tea and let's get started. So I've created a starter template for you in the description. So if you want to download that, it gives us the basics for us to get started. So I'm just going to copy some code now so I can show you how we can add JavaScript straight into our HTML within script tags. I'm not using live server here, so when I save, you should see in the terminal in the right, we get text to output. And this is kind of what JavaScript looks like. I'm not going to go too much into it just now, but in the following lessons, this is all going to become clear. But the standard is to separate your code into its components. So HTML in a HTML file, CSS in a CSS, and JavaScript in its own file. So let's add our own JavaScript file. And let's remove this. So I'm just going to go create in here, right click, new file, main.js. And what we now need to do is link our main.js to our index.html. And how we do that is in script tags. So we always want to do this before the closing body tags. So if we say script, src equals main.js. We want to close that script tag and have a closing script tag. And the reason we're doing it before the body closes is because if we want to change things on the page, we want to change elements on the page, we need those elements to have been rendered first so the JavaScript can actually see them to manipulate them. Now we need a line of code just to test our main.js file is linked. So if we just go to our main.js file and we can just do console.log. We can say hello here. I'm going to put a semicolon at the end. So console.log, brackets, quote marks, single or double, hello, close your quotes, close your brackets, and a semicolon. If I save that, you can see in our console, we have hello. So now we know our main.js is linked with our index.html. Now console.log is JavaScript's way of logging things to the console, so we can log data to the console. It's very useful when coming to debug, so we use this quite often so you get very familiar with writing this line of code. Okay, so variables are the first things we need to grasp in JavaScript. Now a variable is kind of like a storage space for data, which we can name so it's easy to recall. So you can think of a variable as a box for some data. That box has a label on it telling you what's inside. Now in JavaScript, there's a few ways we can create variables or declare them. And this is the most common. So we start with a var keyword, which sets JavaScript up to know this is a variable. Then we give the variable a name, a label, which in this case is some text. Then we set the contents of it. So we set that by saying equals, and in this case we're doing a string or a sentence. So in quotes, we write what we want to write, then we follow it up with a semicolon. Now that we've declared our variable, we want to now be able to use that in our code, so we need to be able to retrieve it. And this is the most common way of doing that. So we have our variable declared, var some text. Now we can use console.log from earlier, and we can just put in some text inside our brackets in the console log. So now we don't have to write out the string of text again. We can just give it the name of our string of text from the variable name. So let's show you that in our editor. So if we come here and we set a variable, and we can set it to whatever we want. So the name can be whatever we want. So in this case it's some text. And we can set it with either single or double quotes. But if you start with a single, you must end with a single. So we're going to do single quotes. This is our variable, and follow it with a semicolon to show that we've finished our line of code. Now we want to retrieve that line of code. So if we save right now, nothing happens in our terminal. But if we console.log, and we put some text within our brackets, finish with a semicolon because we're finishing the line, then hit save, you can see this is our variable is outputted to our console. And we haven't had to type it in the console log, we can just reference the name of our variable. So some things to note here. A label or name can only contain numbers, letters, dollar signs, or underscores, but must not start with a number. Names are also case sensitive. So in our example, I've used camel case. This is common in JavaScript, meaning our first word does not have a capital, but every other word after that starts with a capital. This just helps us read our variables with the omission of spaces. There are also underscores we can use, like here. We can also declare variables with no value. So here we have us declaring a variable called SumText. So later on the next line, we're adding some random string text to our variable. And how we do that is we just omit the var keyword. So once we have declared the variable with the var keyword, to overwrite or to add to it, we just need to use the variable name. So let's show you that in some code. So if we declare our variable, let's call our variable more text. And if we then try to console log more text, you see it's undefined because we don't have anything in the more text box in our more text variable. So what we can do, so underneath more text, because it reads from top to the bottom in JavaScript, we can then say more text without the var keyword equals, here is some more text. Semicolon at the end. Now if we save this, there we have our text. So we've declared the variable, then assigned the variable its value, then we have console logged out that variable to our console in our browser. You may also see things like let and const when it comes to variables. So let more text equals, here is more text. You can see that's worked the same. And const also. Now these have a few different properties and they still work. Here is more text, exclamation mark, you can see it change. Now they are both variables, all three of them are variables even, but const and let have different values and different attributes that they have. So we will get into that later in the ES6 modules. So there are other data types in JavaScript. We can also use numbers declared as a value for variables. So we just do that like this. So we're just doing a number without quotes and assigning it the same way that we would a string. We can also do math in JavaScript and assigning them to variables also. So here we've done 3 is 1 plus 2, and we can assign that equation to the variable. We don't need to have the final output. Then as you can see below, we can say 4 is our variable 3, which we now know is 3, the number 3, plus 1. And notice none of these have quote marks, so they're all seen in JavaScript as numbers. So let's show you that in the code. So we can do var a equals 2, var b equals 3. Now we could console.log a plus b. Don't forget the semicolon, and that will give us our answer. So just like that, we can do it, or we could add them to their own variable. So we could say var result equals a plus b. Then we could console log out the results variable, and we'll get the same answer. However, if these had quote marks around them, and we save that, you can see it's saying 23 because it's seeing the first one as a 2. So it can't add 2 plus 3 to make 5 because they're strings. So actually what it's doing, if I do this also, it's concatenating the two variables together. So it's saying 2 plus 3. So we can do that with sentences like your space name. So if it's a number, it will add them together. If it's a string, or even if it's a number inside quotes, that's a string, it will concat them together. So it will add them together. So some of the other common math operators we can use are addition, subtraction, multiplication is just the star symbol, division is the /, and remainder, which is just a percentage symbol. So these are other common math operators that we can use. So we can also increment and decrement, and the way we do that is a plus will increment and minus will decrement. So let's show you that in the code. So if I create a variable called 10, we'll set that equal to the number 10. Now if I then say 10 plus, showing us 10, but if I now do that again, you'll see we are at 11. And that's because we have incremented 10 by 1. And same again, if I say 10 plus, showing 11, but if I run the 10 again as a variable name, you can see 12. So I'm setting the variable, then I'm retrieving it, and that's why it's incremented by 1. So next I want to talk about booleans. Now booleans are written without quotes, and you can only have two values, true or false. So it's almost like it's a string, but you need to remember no quotes, no capitals in this either, and this can be used for keeping track of like the completed status of a to-do item. So if you want to just make that to-do complete, you can have it is complete true, or keeping track of a menu open and close. So is active is another good way to label it, and we can have true or false so we know if something like a menu is active or not. And the last type I want to talk about is undefined null. So these are special values. They're not the same as 0 because 0 is a value. 0 is a number itself. So in JavaScript, we need to know things like the absence of things. So null is the intentional absence of a value and can be assigned to a variable. So if we want to say something doesn't have a value, we can use null. Now undefined means a variable has been assigned a value. So undefined means a variable has not been assigned a value or not declared at all. So this is a really good meme that represents it. So non-zero value, we have things, one piece of toilet paper. 0 is a value. We know there is no toilet paper left. Null means we are set up, the toilet paper holder is there, but we don't have any value assigned to it. So it's null. And undefined means it just doesn't exist. We don't have it. So let's show you how that works. So we can say var start equals null. Console.log brackets start. Okay, and it's going to tell us the value is null. Different to a value of 0, where the value is 0. Now undefined was the variable doesn't exist or there's no value. So I could say start, we haven't assigned a value, it's undefined. Or we can remove the declaration of the variable entirely and try to output it with a console log, and you could say it's a different type of error message, but it is not defined. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next part of JavaScript Basics.